when it comes to fasting, don't tell yourself you're eating nothing. You are eating. You're eating the Krispy Kreme donut you had when you were 8 years old. That's been on your fat fucking face your whole life. So let's get rid of that. You're still eating, so don't act like you're hungry. Don't cry like a bitch. Like, just do it. The cold plunge stuff is really all about hype. Most of the stuff out there is just bullshit.
Yeah.
So many people don't realize what feeling good is.
That's very true.
They don't know.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Travis Makes Friends podcast. Today, I'm making friends with Dr. John Jaquish. How's it going, man? Welcome to the show.
It's fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm glad to get you in the air-conditioned room after you've been braving the heat of the Las Vegas summer.
It's the air conditioning's nice.
Yeah, just a little bit. But you're talking about going to Arizona after this, which is even hotter.
Yeah,
here.
Yep. They have melted trash cans there. You ever seen the standard green trash cans like start to slightly bend and kind of crumple? Yeah, and like you got to get over 120, and they've had a couple of days like that.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I was gonna say Vegas gets like 115, 116, which is already too damn hot, to be clear.
Too damn hot, yeah.
But I was in Bullhead City, Arizona, which is where Lake Mojave is, by border of Laughlin, you know.
Yeah.
And we were there for a houseboat trip with my family for a few years back.
Yeah.
It was 126. And I was like, this shouldn't be allowed on the planet.
No.
This is too hot. Like, we should not exist here right now. This is ridiculous.
Heat kills a lot more people than cold.
Does it?
Yeah. And that surprises everyone when you think about
kidding.
it. Yeah. We can survive cold very well. It doesn't mean it's comfortable.
I was going to say, is that the reason for all the cold plunge stuff that's happening right now?
No, the cold plunge stuff is really all about hype.
Really?
Yeah. There have been
I'd love to hear more about
two great
that,
studies that have come out recently that really, it shows that it doesn't enhance your recovery ability at all. It does take away inflammation markers that cause growth.
So that's not a good thing.
That's not a good thing. So, a lot of people, and of course, there is a tiny effect on brown fat.
Okay.
So like you drop temperature low enough. The idea is that if you can form an ice crystal in fat, the ice crystals are shaped in a way where they puncture the cell membrane of some of the fat cells and force them to metabolize, because once they don't have a cell membrane anymore, they're just sort of free flowing in the circulatory system. That claim is marginally true, but brutally exaggerated by the people who sell cold therapy stuff. So like, I like cold therapy. I would do cold therapy if I had a cold plunge. I would have to get my wife's buy-in.
Yeah, good luck.
So, right. I mean, like I will spend those chips where I have to. I'm not going to spend it on a cold plunge.
On a cold plunge, yeah.
No, I mean, if we build a nice big house.
Like there is improvement,
sure.
but like not a $15,000 cold plunge in your basement improvement.
Here's right. Exactly. Like to me, it's worth it if the money it's going to cost is nothing to you. And if you want to basically replace your morning coffee with a cold plunge, because to start the day, to get circulation going, it's awesome.
Yeah.
Absolutely better blood flow, better than the vasoconstriction provided by caffeine, which also has a couple of downsides. So, like I'm 50-50. I especially am very aware of some of the downsides of caffeine because I had an H. pylori infection for 7 years. You probably don't know what that is.
Yeah, please explain.
No one in America knows what. In fact, American doctors don't even know what.
I was going to say my naturopathic doctor talks about it fairly frequently, but
okay. Well, that guy.
But I'd love an explanation though.
So it's a bacteria, lives in your stomach. It consumes the mucous membrane of the human stomach, also animal stomachs. But basically, it just makes you like bloated, like you wouldn't believe. And I mean, I was to the point where I had trouble breathing.
So it like damage your gut microbiome?
It's not a microbiome thing. That's before we get to the microbiome. It's the stomach.
Got it.
It doesn't seem to have much of a knock-on effect into the rest of the digestive system. But having ulcers all over the lining of your stomach really sucks, and it is very limiting, and it takes years to heal from it.
And there's a correlation for you between that and caffeine?
So caffeine really brutalizes these ulcers. So you've got to like either like massively limit and dilute or eliminate. So like, I have a pre-workout called Imperium.
Mhm.
I make that shit so diluted that it's like I'll drink a liter of water for like a quarter a scoop.
Mm.
And like that's the only way I'll like get, some. So I become a low caffeine guy, not by choice.
Okay.
Just, kind of like forced.
Do you do anything else for like energy boosts or
Most of the stuff out
anything
there
like
is
that?
just bullshit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate.
It is. A lot of like energy drinks.
It's like you want to believe it so much.
Of course.
So, yeah.
Well, I mean, hey, that's why people buy most stuff because they
Right.
want to believe it.
Right.
And
They're
which
looking
is
for
tough.
the reasons to justify their decision they've already made.
Every listener, like who's doing something entrepreneurial, needs to consider the fact that no matter what their claim is, people are initially going to say bullshit because most of the stuff out there is kind of wishful thinking or what people want to hear. The majority of nutrition programs, like a lot of different influencers, they have like, sign up for my 12-week program. I'm going to totally change your nutrition. You're going to live a better lifestyle. And don't worry, you get to eat pizza and donuts. And it's like, right, it's just telling people what they want to hear. And then, of course, they get into the material and then they're like, oh, I can have like a piece of pizza once a month.
Yeah.
And that's not what they wanted to hear.
So I have this gross keto cookie that doesn't taste like a cookie.
Right. It tastes more like algae or something, which is probably made of algae. It's like,
it's not made of cookie. I'll tell you that.
It's not a cookie. It's whatever. But
I think I'd rather just have a cookie.
And it's so like much of a struggle. And it's just people need to, but look how much people love the stuff that they want to hear.
Yeah.
We are at a place in society where people would pick a news channel and I'll just say what I'm thinking. They watch CNN. Mm-hmm. Almost everything on CNN is an absolute lie. Almost everything. Yet people still choose to only immerse themselves in CNN because it's like, it's the news they want. Mm. They want to believe Orange Man bad. They want to believe, I don't really, I don't have a side in this argument.
Yeah.
Like when it comes to science,
it's
just like, I don't give a shit who wins president, but
to me, it's always like the polar opposite sides tend to be that way almost exclusively because they're only getting their information from this one thing, this one source, and they only talk to other people who agree with that
total
source
echo
as well.
chamber behavior.
They create this world that exists only for them.
For them. And it's not true anyway. Not true. Right. And actually both sides do that same thing.
Yeah.
But like, CNN is just like an example of like where like you can demonstrate how almost everything they say is false, yet they run with that ball all day, every day. And it's like, who's watching this crap? Like apparently like a decent amount of people.
I was going to say a decreasing number though, because their ratings keep going down all the time.
Right. Well, it probably sucks for the people that really want to believe in, like what the current president has said, but then the economy keeps getting worse and worse and worse despite everything the guy's saying. So it's like, okay, you're wrong.
Right.
It's like, but they're not going to wave the flag and say, excuse me, I was wrong about everything. Like,
right.
No,
exactly.
They're not going to do that.
That doesn't feel good. You know what I mean?
Right. and when it comes to a lot of science and nutrition stuff, like
it's the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Like the guys that are telling people to eat less carbohydrates, they're saying something that's unpopular. Like anyone who tells you to eat less carbohydrates is probably somebody you should follow because that person is, number one, correct. Number two, saying something that is massively unpopular.
Yeah.
Like you're going to lose followers by saying people can't have, or they shouldn't be having, or they should have the least amount possible of candy and cookies and cake. And like, why would you say that? There's only one reason. Because it's true.
It's uncomfortably accurate.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I like that. I'm going to use that. Uncomfortably accurate. Yeah.
Yeah. Because that's the thing, man. I have down a good amount of weight this year myself. And every year it feels like I kind of started from the same spot. And what would happen was I get really disciplined for like really short stints of time. Mm-hmm. And then you start, buying all the bullshit of like 90 days this and 12 weeks this and 75 this and 60 that and 30 this. And it's like, cool, I'll do that. But the problem is like that is also, even if you do the hard work and the discipline of maintaining that plan during that period of time, the bottom line for me anyway, I didn't get to the point where I am now, where I'm about 11% body fat right now. Probably started the year around like 26, 27.
Oh, wow. You must feel so much better.
Oh, completely. Yeah. Totally different.
Congratulations.
But like I got to that point because I finally decided to do the hard work.
Yeah.
Is like, my point is like, I was telling myself it was hard because it's not easy to do something like 75 hard or whatever. And I'm not trying to bash any of those programs in particular. I'm just saying that like conceptually they make sense because they force you to discipline yourself for a period of time. But the bottom line is for me, and I think for most people, is you have to figure out what's going to work for you. And the only way to do that is to work hard on figuring out what works for you in your body and yourself and your lifestyle. Like there's so many other questions to ask. So how often do you travel? How often do you eat out? What do you eat when you eat out? What are you putting in your body when you're at home? Do you have a routine that you're in? How much water you're drinking? Do you drink alcohol? Are you going to parties where alcohol is served? Like there's so many other questions you have to answer. But for me, it just came down to like, well, I'm doing 45 days this, but then 45 days is up and I still don't have any other information about how my body actually processes any of the stuff I'm putting
in those like the programs that have a day limit. They're almost designed for you to fail because it's not a lifestyle.
Right.
It's just, it's a challenge.
That's bottom line.
Yeah. Well, no one ever got healthy from a challenge. Like they're, like look at anyone who wins a medal at the Olympics. It's like, oh, did you do a 45-day challenge to get here? No, they've been training their whole life.
It was a 17-year challenge.
Yeah, right. And it's a lifestyle. It's like, I'm going to eat the absolute optimum nutrition.
Right.
I'm, going to take the supplements I need to take, if any.
Yeah.
I'm going to train as absolutely hard as I can for the specific amount of time. One thing I love about pro athletes is they know what overtraining is and they don't do it. So like, whereas when you come to just sort of the regular population, first of all, they bear the mark of the last truck that hit them.
Yeah.
Meaning the last article they read, it's like, oh, I'm doing that.
I'm keto,
and
baby.
I'm gonna combine it. Yeah, I met somebody. It was a couple years ago. It was one of the stupidest conversations I've ever had. Saw somebody in the airport, and he says, "I'm following your advice, but I'm combining it with like the South Beach diet." And I'm thinking that's the most contradictory.
But so that means you're
the
not
South Beach diet is just basically how to be a lard ass. It's basically like bread and salad and nothing else.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
And lots of cardio probably.
No, they didn't really say much about that. But I mean, ultimately, you can eat crap food and just eat a tiny amount of it. And are you going to lose body fat? Yeah, you'll also lose a ton of muscle.
Sure.
But they don't say that part. So,
not to mention you'll lose feeling good.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
but so many people don't realize what feeling good is.
That's very true.
They don't know.
Yeah.
Like they don't like, it's like once you're carnivore, if you go off carnivore for like a weekend, you're like, God, I feel awful. And then you realize this awful that I feel, this is every day for everyone. Except normally me.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then when you go back, you like really appreciate. You're like, oh my God.
You start realizing that a ton of like the conditions you thought you had were really just a matter of
inflammation, chronic inflammation,
or like you just didn't give your body enough nutrition, or you're eating too much of that thing, and your body is nakedly reacting to that. And it's like, oh well, that wasn't a condition at all. It was just I was drinking. Half a gallon of milk a day.
I was just
and my body didn't like that.
Like an unsupervised child.
But you go to the doctor and they're like, you have IBS, take this medication. And it's just like, now I'm mixing in all these chemicals and other medication in my body with the stuff that I was already putting in my body that I wasn't supposed to be putting in my body.
Right. It's amazing how
it's like a cocktail of poison.
Like chronic diseases really aren't that chronic at all. Like you can make them all go away. You just got to stop eating carbohydrates. It's like the same answer to every question.
Yeah.
I mean, if your diet is mostly meat, you're mostly going to have zero problems.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you recommend I've heard from multiple people now that like a carnivore diet or like restricting everything, but maybe even red meat in particular, is like the best elimination diet that you can do to figure out like what's going on in your body. Do you recommend that to folks?
No. So it's like elimination diet to find out what you react poorly to. That's the point of an elimination diet. But the problem is pretty much everybody reacts poorly to anything other than animal protein.
Really?
Yeah. To a degree.
Okay.
I mean, like for me, I react poorly to dairy because I'm allergic to casein, but other people aren't. So like that side of that elimination exercise could benefit them. But just from a scientific standpoint, pretty much all carbohydrates contain lectins, phthalates, oxalates that are chronic cellular inflammatories. Like you're going to be inflamed. Inflammation we have the greatest link between inflammation and cancer. as well as type 2 diabetes and heart disease. So those are the 3 biggest killers if you take medical error off the list, which almost every news station does, because they don't want you to know about that one. But that's actually the 3rd killer, biggest killer.
You do want to eat carbs though, right? Like there's still not at all.
Yeah, I used to say limited.
Okay.
But like I was recently at the Hard to Kill Summit with Dr. Sean O'Mara.
Okay.
And, ultimately there's a great meta-analysis that was, let me say this part first. Great meta-analysis. One of the authors was Professor Menno Henselmans. Really smart guy. I think he's teaching at Cambridge now. I did a sort of a video podcast. I don't really have a podcast. I have this show called Falsehoods of Fitness, which is probably every like 2 months. Somebody says something and it becomes like a trend and it's like the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And then it's like, okay, here's the science that completely defeats that.
Yeah.
And it's just, then a couple other people will do like the same kind of video.
It's kind of an as-needed show.
Right.
Yeah.
So Professor Henselmans wrote with a bunch of other colleagues a paper about how carbohydrate needs are grossly over-exaggerated, because it used to be like, you want to have like around 100, and then you read another paper, you want to have like 60. Another one will say like 200 is best if you're an endurance athlete, or 150 if you're a strength athlete. And these numbers were based on observations with no comparisons. Gotcha. Right. So it's like these athletes did this and it was great. Or they just compared 2 random numbers. Like they picked 50 for one group and 150 for another. And they said they did the same, So it's like, okay, so what do we know from this? Nothing. So they looked at the glucose glycogen usage. And they really found out that the body doesn't use much. So the idea of like carbing up. For a person who weighs 100 kilos, it's 0.3 per kilo. So I only need 30 grams to carb up. Which is
just like a half a sandwich.
Nothing. It's like a half a sandwich. Right. Like, so, and if your body weight's lower, like for my wife, it's more like 15 grams. And there was actually no differences between genders. In that. And that was a big meta-analysis. I want to say like 50 to 75 papers were analyzed in this.
What about a difference between like type of carbohydrate? Like if you're eating complex carbs, or if you're eating bread versus eating whatever, asparagus or something like that?
Okay, I'll answer that, and then I want to go back to the Sean O'Mara thing.
Okay, yeah.
So the slower you digest a carbohydrate, the less of it is likely to be stored. Now, of course, there is an energy balance thing. I won't use the word calories because that word is idiotic. It's a unit of heat measurement. I know everybody uses it. It's totally fucking wrong. That's like saying, how many degrees Fahrenheit are you eating today? Like literally we could convert calories to degrees Fahrenheit. Like if I asked that question, you look at me like I had 2 heads.
Yeah.
So, energy. So there's an energy balance issue.
Yeah.
But the way we calculate energy, we still count calories from protein, but we shouldn't, because your body has no ability to store protein as body fat. None whatsoever. Which is why when you eat a ton of protein, your body temperature goes up.
Interesting.
Yeah. Like you notice like you have big steak for dinner and then you just start sweating at night. You're like, it's so hot.
Get the meat sweats.
Meat sweats.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the thermogenic effect of overeating, how much protein your body can use.
Interesting.
But it can't be stored, which is why people on the carnivore diet, it's a decent weight loss diet, but it's a really awesome diet for people who don't want to count their calories, but also don't want to put on body fat, because you basically won't.
Interesting.
And there's some arguments of how much fats you need.
Sure.
And that science there's not a good equivalent of that carbohydrate meta-analysis that Professor Henselmans did for fat to really figure out. So like some people will go for leaner cuts of meat. Some people, like I always feel better on fattier cuts of meat. So I pretty much only eat ribeyes.
Okay.
But like my wife likes chicken.
Sure.
And chicken nights, I'm like, okay, maybe I'll eat some liverwurst before dinner. I get some fat in my system.
The first time I started hearing about this, I think, was with Michaela Peterson and Jordan Peterson. I think they kind of really widely popularized it. I think there's a lot of people that were probably already doing it, but then when somebody who's well known all of a sudden gets crucified for doing it.
Right.
Essentially, it was like whoa, hey, well, let's learn about this a little bit more before we just start.
Sure. And I think, they did it out of necessity, with her rheumatoid arthritis, Professor Peterson with just some of the psychological challenges that come with chronic inflammation. Mm-hmm. It's heavily linked to depression. So, and like he would tell you that any amount of carbohydrates will make you depressed. The more carbohydrates you have, the more depressed you'll be. Removing carbohydrates completely from the diet will keep you from depression. But he says you never cheat. You never have a gram of carbohydrates. Now that's extreme. Also, there are carbohydrates in meat in small amounts. Like there's muscle glycogen in the muscle meat of animals. So, is it really zero or is it close to zero? But the moment I was waiting for, because it's like, okay, do we recommend people have low carbohydrates or no carbohydrates? Like, I'd really like an answer. Now, ultimately, people are going to do what they're going to do. So I think you have to have sort of an option for people who are willing to go a little bit lower, but not cut them out completely because they're just unwilling. Sure. So unwilling is unwilling. Like, I'm not going to change their mind. Yeah. But then there's people who want to have the absolute maximum results and they don't care about taste. Like, I want to be the best. And, when it comes to what they eat, it's just a worthwhile sacrifice for them. Yeah.
So here's the options.
Right. Yeah. So Sean Amara, I think he has the smartest approach to looking at general health. The ultimate marker he looks at is visceral fat. So the fat that is between organs in sort of the middle of your body. Because, some people have like a gut, but it's not like a roll of soft fat. It's like hard.
Yeah. It's a keg.
It's a keg.
It's not six pack. It's
right.
Keg. Yeah.
It's because on the inside, they have fat pushing all of their organs and their abdomen outward. And so visceral fat, it's highly linked to all chronic diseases I mentioned earlier. Sort of the worse your visceral fat is, the worse those things, type 2 diabetes, cancer, and heart disease are all like on that list, like heavily tied. So I wouldn't say there's a causation relationship. There isn't. But there is like the correlation
certainly
is super heavy.
Yeah.
And right, like anybody who's got any of those problems, like I had a fraternity brother who was a really slim guy, but he would eat trash, just nothing but like, it was like pasta. Like he was really the whole like, oh, meat's bad for you, so I'm just going to have a bowl of pasta every night. And he's like, it's cheaper anyway. So, he's at my fraternity house. And
you got to listen to the food pyramid, man.
Well, right. Yeah. The food pyramid got him because he's diabetic. And he was when we were very young. And he's like, but I'm not fat. Yeah. And I thought back, I'm like, I bet his visceral fat was significant. Yeah. So Dr. Amara, he's been doing these analyses for years, just looking at visceral fat. And he says, he keeps saying that the only thing that really drives visceral fat down to levels where you're truly healthy is carnivore without any cheating or anything like that.
Interesting.
And so I actually got the chance to ask him on stage. We were on a panel, and I'm like, I have a question for Dr. Omar. He was sitting right next to me, and I said, to be absolutely optimal, to have the best visceral fat, how many, on average, grams of carbohydrates per day should people be taking in? And I could see the look on his face because he just did not want to answer that question. Yeah. I was like, yeah.
I don't want to tell anybody what to do.
And he goes, well, he says, I'll tell you. And he pauses because he knows, like, he says, the answer is 0.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, wow. I mean, like, I didn't even really want to hear that.
Sure.
Like, yeah, there's stuff like, sometimes I like some sauce on my steak.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's a little bit of sugar in that. I used to love eating ribs until I found out what the hell they do to ribs. And then it's just like, I can never eat ribs again. Yeah, right. It's just like, I mean, they just drench it in like, basically melted Snickers bars.
Yeah.
Like, unfortunately, it was like such a bummer when I figured that out.
So if you're going to cheat on your diet, what's your go-to?
I just don't.
I
mean, I suppose like my wife just had like a kind of a fitness figure kind of competition.
Yeah.
We went out to dinner and I had a bite of a couple things that I would never normally eat. Yeah. So that's it. But still, I mean, I might be like under 50 grams.
So you're mostly just eating protein, lean meat, fatty meat.
Usually my order at a restaurant is like a 40-ounce ribeye.
Okay.
Like a tomahawk or something.
What about having like eggs in the morning, stuff like that? Eggs are good, right?
Eggs are amazing. Yeah. I typically do 1 or 2 meals a day.
Okay.
Just because I travel
busy.
a lot.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
That's what I've gotten down to. Yeah.
I definitely prefer 2 meals a day. That's much more comfortable.
Sure.
Because like, sometimes going over 40 ounces, like I might have like a 60-ounce steak. Like that last 10 ounces, I do not love. And I'm just like, and hey, Dr. Sean Baker always says like, eat steak like it's your job. Like you're trying to fuel growth. You're trying to be the absolute best. And that comes from nutrition.
I'm going to get that quote printed out somewhere, put it somewhere.
Yeah. Put that on the wall.
Eat steak like it's your job. That's something I can do.
Right. Yeah. Right. And if you think of it that way, it's a lot easier.
Yeah.
Another thing I really enjoy is fasting.
Yeah.
Like when I want to cut body fat, there's no easier way to do it. There's a lot of great research out there about fasting. It shows you some of the benefits that you get with fasting that you don't get with calorie restriction. But there's some zealots out there who are just like, no, calorie restriction is absolutely superior. Eating makes you hungry.
That's true.
Which is why when you eat, you should eat until you're full.
Yeah.
This whole like eating small meals, it's just torture. Like I hate it. And it doesn't work very well. And any study that comes up with a contradictory answer to that, I really question the methods. Because there are some that say, oh, people had just as easy of a time sticking with calorie restriction than they did with fasting. And I'm just thinking, no.
Yeah.
Like they did the study wrong. I don't know what they did wrong. Then, of course, there are also fasting studies that say fasting doesn't work, where the fasting group ate 600 calories a day. How's that fasting?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so they just basically lied in the title of the study.
I saw this advertisement the other day for a fasting bar.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, what are we doing here?
Right.
I know maybe technically it doesn't break the fast or whatever, but it's like, if you're going to fast, just fast.
Here's
a fasting bar for you. It's just an empty wrapper. When
you come across, right, it'd be great if there was nothing in it. Or just a rock. Just throw this rock in the pond.
Yeah. Amuse yourself with something besides food.
Yeah. That totally derailed me.
Sorry, I apologize.
Yeah.
But anyway, fasting. So that's been my MO for like the duration of the year for me.
It's so much easier.
It's definitely, that was the big thing for me, man, because like I travel a lot and it's so almost impossible for me to follow a specific diet or a specific meal plan while I'm traveling. It's just, everything is more difficult about it. You gotta either you're gonna pack a bunch of meals in like a cooler, but I like to travel light with a carry-on and nothing else. So like, how does that work?
Yeah,
and then if you're gonna go eat out, it's like, what are you gonna do?
Nothing.
Can I get a piece of meat, no seasoning, nothing else on the side, just that? It's just, there's so much more work to be done. So when I travel now,
when you're in another country and you ask for that, and then sometimes you'll get like a plate with like one piece of lunch meat on it that's like a half an ounce. And they charge you like $25 for it, and you're like,
it's like, that is
you
not
really
what I was
think that's
this
what I asked for?
Yeah. Just easier for me just to be like, you know what?
Forget it.
No food till dinner, and then I'll go to dinner and I'll grab something at dinner that I know will be good.
So I tell people when it comes to fasting, don't tell yourself you're eating nothing. You are eating. You're eating the Krispy Kreme donut you had when you were 8 years old. That's been on your fat fucking face your whole life. So let's get rid of that. And you're still eating, so don't act like you're hungry. Don't cry like a bitch. Like, just do it.
Yeah. That's definitely been the thing for me this year, has been just like, you know what? I'm just gonna fast more often than not. But like
so
kind of what you
easier.
said, I kind of just, it sounds cliche, but I just listen to my body. It's like, if I feel like I'm getting weak, or if my workout at the gym wasn't that good or whatever, then like, I'll have 2 meals instead of 1 meal, or throw in a protein shake or whatever, some jerky or something like that.
Sure.
But like for the most part, it's been helpful and it's been effective.
Totally.
But I want to go back in time here, John, because we've been talking about some really practical, tactical things, but I want to go back in to kind of build some context around like, okay, for somebody listening who doesn't know who you are, but like, why should I listen to this guy's opinion on nutrition? So let's take a trip back in time here. Let's say 10-year-old, 11-year-old John. Set the scene for us. Where were you? What was life like? Parents, what were they doing? Stuff like that. 10.
I don't know if the story's that interesting when I was 10. Boy, I think I broke all the Cub Scout and Boy Scout fitness records.
There you go. So you're always into fitness.
Yeah.
Okay.
Always
Were your
liked
parents
being
that way?
fast, strong. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. My mom was a great tennis player. My
Okay.
dad, he was a sprinter, and then he always stayed pretty athletic.
What do you do for work?
Oh, geez, my dad, I could give you an hour lecture on everything my dad's. Probably the
He's a
most
hustler.
Most notable thing is he's one of 8 people who put the lunar roving vehicle on the moon.
Oh, wow.
So he's a NASA scientist.
Wow.
Yeah.
So he kind of set the bar high in nutrition, fitness.
No, he pretty much ate about 90% meat, and he never really had a reason why.
Even back then.
Yeah.
Because that was when it was like the food pyramid.
No. He was, I had like when I was a little kid, like all other little kids, I hated vegetables, and he's just like, don't eat them. Just forget it. And we need to pay more attention to the instincts of children, because children go to eat vegetables and they taste something that's poisonous. Literally, it's full of oxalates. Like a deer has 30,000 times the resistance to oxalates than we do. So maybe it's not fucking food for us. Maybe just for the deer. So, but then we're surrounded by idiots who just lie about these things and say, oh, no, vegetables are really good for you. Like, it's not really what the clinical literature says. In fact, there was a burden of proof study that came out this year, like illustrating how meat is bad for you is a theme in so many nutrition, like tens of thousands of nutrition scientific papers. Yet there is no justification for that comment in those papers. So it's just sort of a bias against it that nobody ever really explained. I can explain it. Meat's expensive. Carbohydrates are cheap. So our government wants to, we got 69% of America right now having their money managed by the U.S. government, whether it's welfare or, I know I don't want to conflate welfare and Social Security. Somebody will have a fucking fit about that. But from the perspective of where is your money coming from and how is it being doled out, they're identical. So the federal government doesn't want to pay for people to eat steak every day. They need to pay everybody $25. They'd rather give them $2 so they can eat Twinkies and then tell them it's healthy. So it's a matter of it's cheap.
Yeah.
So that's going to be the information that will always be pushed from medical authorities. Otherwise, people are going to demand more expensive food. And no country can afford it. If our country can't afford it, no country can afford it.
Sure.
So it's a shame, but nutrition is more expensive.
You've obviously, this has obviously been something you've cared about then for a really long time. If you say that this has mattered to you when you were even in elementary school. Right. So did you do a bunch of athletic stuff in high school, college, play sports? Yeah.
Wrestling, swimming, and track in high school. And then in undergrad, I played rugby.
Okay. Where'd you go to school? Sac State.
Okay. It's the #1 university on Highway 50. You should tell your wife that. Being from Sacramento, she'll love that. Sac State. Big school, fun school. I wouldn't call it a party school. It was for me, though.
I was going to say, I've heard a couple people call it a party school.
It's a very fun place to be. And I kind of majored in fraternity and minored in rugby. I managed to get my coursework done somehow.
Did you major in something like
business?
Exercise science?
No, I majored. No. It's funny. My father, who's a scientist, would not pay for me to have an education in anything science related. No, he says you need to figure out the business side, because he told me I spent most of my life developing amazing technologies, and the guy's got 1,200 patents or something like that. He said, I spent most of my life developing patents that benefited the shareholders of the companies that I worked for. I got paid a great salary, but wow, if I owned some of the intellectual property that I created for Defense Research Laboratories or NASA or whoever else he was working for, boy.
Yeah. A little bit of a different story.
Yeah. He said you'd be taking a helicopter wherever you wanted to go.
Right.
And so he's like, you want to, he goes, the science stuff comes easy to you. He's talking to me. And he's right. Yeah. Science was always easy to me. You need to figure out business. So majored in business, and then he paid for my MBA.
Great.
And then it was sort of like, God, maybe I was done with my MBA 6 months, and my mother was diagnosed with osteoporosis. And so she told me about the medication she was prescribed, and she didn't want to take them. And I was like, oh boy, like based on what you told me, I wouldn't want to either.
Yeah.
But she went from being a tennis, like her things were tennis, hiking, and gardening. And she didn't want to do any of those things anymore because she was afraid she'd fracture a bone. So for those listeners that don't know what osteoporosis is, it's the weakening of bones. The bones become more porous and therefore are more likely to fracture. So I told my mom, let me look into this. Like, because this seems like something that should be easier to fix, and maybe not with a biochemical approach. And I'm really glad. In fact, my PhD advisor told me, if you had done your PhD first, you would have talked yourself out of this, because it's so different. Basically, I looked at who the outliers are of bone density, who has the most powerful bone. And it turns out it's gymnasts. It was a very easy population to identify. So gymnasts, they expose themselves to huge loading events, hitting the ground at sometimes 10 or 15 times their body weight.
Wow.
Right. Way beyond what we would get with weights.
Yeah, right.
Like way magnitudes beyond. But they also retire at an average age of 19 because they get so injured. So it's like, okay, how do we get that bone loading without the risks of injury? And so that was what ultimately became OsteoStrong.
Yeah.
And
that was really like your first
That was
venture.
My first, that was my first company, my first invention. So I developed a series of devices that put so this is the axis of a bone, put axial compression on the bone. So compress the bone from end to end, slightly distorting the bone during the stimulus, which only takes a few seconds. The bone springs back into position, and now it's primed to pull in minerals and recalcify and making the bone less porous. So more little walls go into that sort of matrix inside the bone, and the bone becomes more powerful. It works for everyone who it's right for. Now, it's not right for absolutely everybody. You got to be relatively ambulatory, relatively pain-free. Move around. Like if you're in a wheelchair, like you can't self-compress your femur if you have no use of your leg muscles.
Gotcha.
Like, so it's very self-driven.
And would this be more preventative than?
No, it's curative.
Okay.
Yeah. You can use it in a preventative manner. Like there are many women who have some of the risk factors, like family members that have it, or they were vegan for a particular period of time. This is really why I became such a fan of carnivore. When you look at what happens with bone is destroyed by vegetables. Fruits and vegetables. If you eat fruits and vegetables, you're going to have bone that is falling apart.
Interesting.
It needs animal protein. And
just to maintain density?
Yeah, yes. And it's not just calcium. Like, in fact, calcium that you get through more kind of carnivore nutrition, the calcium level is high. In fact, calcium is the only mineral that your body balances itself. So if you take calcium pills and you're not giving the body a reason to hang on to that or to more calcium. So what happens is people do less and less activity, and then they start losing bone, and then they have menopause, and then they start losing bone even faster because of menopause. So then they're like, well, I should take calcium tablets. That actually accelerates the loss, because the more calcium that's in the bloodstream that you're taking, the body's like, oh, we can let go some more of it that's held within the bone.
Interesting.
So then it makes the problem even worse. Now there's conflicting research on that. Some of the research on the subject, they'd rather recommend calcium just because it's the safer recommendation.
Sure. But
there are actually more studies that say the opposite. So now there might be higher quality studies that say calcium, but I'm not going to get caught up in that argument, because you're still doing fuck all for getting the calcium to stay in the bone. You got to stimulate the bone. It's just like a muscle. Like,
so if you
can take all the protein you want and not work out, and are you going to get bigger muscles? No.
Right.
Same thing with bone.
So if you theoretically, if you were doing treatments at OsteoStrong and taking calcium, would it be more effective?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah,
because you're actually
you're giving the body a reason to use it.
Yeah.
Right. So just having the nutrient without the stimulus, you could be making the problem worse.
Sure.
So yeah.
At what point did you realize that like this was actually going to work? Like, I mean, yeah, every entrepreneur has an idea, right? But the idea is a dime a dozen. The execution's what matters. And so when was the point where you were true. Like, yeah, I think like not only is this actually something that people are taking, but we actually have clinical research here that now says that this works.
I knew it was going to work before I even built a prototype, but just because there was enough data that showed the loading and the response to that loading.
Gotcha.
So it was
you
really
had to figure out how to do the loading without the risk of injury.
This solution was so obvious, but things can be obvious if you really understand research and you know how to sort it and group it together correctly.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people read the words in the research and they can repeat a sentence here and there, but do they really know what the study's about? They don't have a clue. And the internet is full of people talking about studies that they don't really know what it's about. And research is not really written for regular people to read. It's written for other researchers to read, so they can then leverage that information into further research. So, you know, I get it. Like, I understand the problem. Researchers could definitely do a better job trying to make the information more accessible,
more digestible for the average person.
More digestible to the broad population,
totally
because
ultimately
you can dazzle your researcher friends with, you know, like I see, you know, we broke the data up into tertiles. You mean thirds? Like, why didn't you just say third? You know what I mean? It's just like,
well, what happens is the majority of the population gets their information from marketers instead of researchers.
Facts, absolute fact. Yeah. Why do we need 8 glasses of water a day? By the way, we don't. But why are we told that?
I don't know. I read it in a health book when I was.
It's in a lot of health books. It's like even in medical textbooks. But you know where it came from?
No.
Gatorade.
Oh, really?
Gatorade determined that that's what people need for their marketing. And it's like, you know, are you going to drink water all day long? Or, you know, our drink has like a good taste to it and it has electrolytes, which is what the movie Idiocracy makes fun of the entire time with the whole electrolyte thing. Everybody was walking around in the 80s talking about electrolytes. And it's like, do you guys even know what that is? And they're like, you know, no. I mean, it's good for you, I guess.
Yeah.
I have no idea what it is.
All I know is this tastes really good.
Right. It tastes good because it's got tons of sugar.
You're drinking 38 grams of sugar.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
all right. So I know you might break my heart with this one, John, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Artificial sweeteners, dangers, positives, negatives. Like if you're drinking a Gatorade versus a Gatorade Zero. That has no sugar or calories.
So not all artificial sweeteners are as bad as others.
Okay.
Now, a lot of people who look at nutrition and will land on carnivore, I mean, basically the people who are reading the current literature, they all come out of the same conclusion. You got to go and examine what it is that gets us to go off the rails. And so one of the problems with artificial sweeteners, and I sell products with artificial sweeteners, though I wish it weren't necessary. Really wish it weren't necessary, because
that's a good way to say it.
It still trains your mind that sweet taste is something. Now, there's aspartame, which is linked to aspartame and sucralose are linked to cancer. And in fact, oh my God, I was on this show, which I didn't realize was sponsored by Pepsi.
Oh no.
And so they interviewed me. It was a news show, but one of their sponsors was Pepsi. And, you know, like there's certain things that the newscaster, the anchor, like they'll just cut you off. And so
can't say that.
Said, right.
We love you, Pepsi.
Because we're talking about artificial sweeteners. And I'm like, well, this is the first study that is actually look at the mechanism of cancer cells being created. And it had to do with this new type of test that they could look at lining of the stomach and how it reacted to the introduction of sucralose. And so it was the first mechanistic study which showed precancer cells being created. Now, the other ones were just like survey-based studies, epidemiology, which is very low level of evidence. And a lot of people like look at epidemiology and, just go, well, it's the best we have because you can't keep a human being in a cage to do a nutrition study on them. Well, I mean, at least this country can't. There's a couple others that
I was gonna say.
I've heard some things. Yeah, like in certain countries, which I won't name, they will ask you to sign up, and you will be like in like a dorm room.
Oh gosh.
And they will control everything they give you. Honestly, if people volunteer for it and they get paid for it, and we will get a more valuable outcome out of that.
Right.
So anyway, it'll never happen in the States. So when looking at some of these epidemiological studies, these survey-based studies, it's just like, well, the problem with survey-based studies is people tell the person asking the question what they think that person wants to hear, or something,
or what they think might increase their status in the eyes of that person, or
maybe
like there's some sort of bias.
It leaves somebody questioning themselves and wanting to sort of like put their best foot forward, which is really not like the point. The point is we just want accurate data.
Yeah, know the truth.
Right. So like actually recording what people eat is way better than asking them what they ate.
So basically, sucralose and aspartame are probably the two most commonly used.
Oh, by the way, when I said that, the guy immediately cuts me off and he says, well, just keep in mind, there are multiple studies on this subject that found that these sweeteners are very harmless, so you shouldn't make any decisions. And it's just like, hey, dude, like I wanted to say, hey, dude, I just told you why those studies are not as powerful as this new one. But, do you
want me here or do you not want me here?
Right. And it was like a big news station. So, all right.
Yeah,
whatever.
That's how it goes, right?
Yeah.
So which ones are, I from what I've heard, stevia would be one of the better ones, or there's a couple
Stevia is the one I use in my products.
Okay.
It still reinforces the sweet taste.
Sure.
But I'm not going to make, a pre-workout drink taste like.
Yeah, but.
Yeah, just tastes awful.
That flavor doesn't get many people. It gets some. I mean, sometimes you really don't want it. And actually this is like something that it's a problem in society, is that everything needs to taste like a dessert. Yeah.
Like when people complain about the way a supplement tastes, it's like, it's a supplement. Like you should be happy it's flavored at all. Cause if it were unflavored, like you'd be gagging while swallowing it. However, people just kick and scream, and it's like, it's got to taste like a candy bar. Otherwise they won't eat it. And that's like, look at how conditioned we are. Like when I was a little kid, candy bars were a reward.
Right.
Now I walk into people's homes and there's a bowl of candy bars like on the counter, and kids will just stand there and eat 2 or 3 and then, go play video games, come back before dinner, eat 2 or 3.
Yeah. Not having any room for dinner.
Not having, Not having any room for anything, which wasn't even nutritious anyway, because they probably just got pizza.
Yeah. I was just saying their parents just make them a separate meal outside of the meal that they're eating.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. That didn't fly with me, man. My mom used to set a timer. She would set a timer. She's like, if the food's not done before that timer hits 0, then you're going to bed. And it was like 7:00. So,
nice.
All right,
okay. So you finished.
Guess I got to eat the food unless I want to go to bed. And there were a couple times I did go to bed because I didn't want to eat the food. But you know what? I had to learn how to cope.
Probably
with it,
when there was a lot of vegetables on your plate. You're like, I'm not eating that.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So, start OsteoStrong. At what point do things really start like kicking off and going well? And tell me about the partnership with Tony Robbins and how that came about.
When Tony came
aboard
to OsteoStrong.
How did you guys get connected or find out about each other?
He called me.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
so he was
heard about it.
Okay.
There was a guy
at this point. Like, how big are you as a company in terms of like locations and things like that?
At the point where Tony called me, I was operating out of a room about twice this size.
Okay.
And in the Napa Valley, California.
Okay.
That's when I first started talking to Tony.
Wow.
And then he started really getting involved a couple years later when we were ready to scale up.
Gotcha.
And it was a little bit different company at that point, which was much better for Tony. And Yeah. I mean, it was like he understood enough
Mhm.
about what I was trying to say. He read my first book called Osteogenic Loading.
Okay.
I don't recommend that to anyone, by the way. An adaptation of my PhD dissertation. It's like super boring.
Okay.
Weightlifting is a waste of time. That's the book everybody should read
I got
because it's like, it talks about the bone density and it talks about strength. It talks about nutrition. It talks about like there's a whole section in there about falsehoods of fitness. Just stuff you've been told your whole life. Yeah, it's designed. Designed for. Now, I put 260 references, so you can look up the studies if you want to. They're there.
Okay.
But I might say this study found this, which really means, and I explain it in a way where, like, my mom would understand it.
Sure.
Yeah, she's not a scientific type person, so.
How did you find the process of working with Tony and his team? Was that pretty seamless for you? Was it an enjoyable process?
No. Never is.
Yeah.
Because it's like my baby, like
that's why I ask.
Yeah.
Like people, I say that, I ask the question because I think that it's important for people to like not glamorize certain parts of things.
Sure.
Like a lot of people would be like, oh my gosh, dream come true. That's amazing. But if you're like an entrepreneur and like you said, like this isn't just something you came up with in the middle of the night.
It's never easy.
Like, this was a pain point of yours because of a problem with your mom, and like you are giving some aspect of control to somebody else, regardless of how you want to paint the picture. So
right, yeah. So I have a royalty deal with the company, and they're taking the technology to market. And yeah, at first it was sort of like, oh, let's like have a DJ booth there, and let's make it like really fun, and let's attract young people. And it's like, young people don't have osteoporosis, like. Huh?
They're not struggling with their bone density.
Like we don't need to make this place the coolest place to be.
Right.
We're actually solving a problem. And by the way, osteoporosis kills as many people as breast cancer does.
Wow.
Right. It's not as dramatic because what happens is people have a fracture, they go to the hospital, they can't heal their fracture, they're stuck in bed because they can't move around, they get pneumonia, and they die annoying. So it's less dramatic, but it's still death.
Right.
You have a 50% chance of dying if you have a hip fracture over the age of 50.
Wow.
Within 1 year. Within 1 year of that fracture.
That's wild.
Yeah. Absolutely crazy statistic.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, there's very poor education on that subject. Also, I mean, I think the breast cancer awareness marketing had gone really well. They get everybody in the NFL to wear pink shoes.
Sure.
Also, I think it's very scary for women, whereas breasts are like, something that females have.
Right. Exclusively.
I can still say that on this podcast, right? Because we're not in clown world right now. Okay. Yeah. So breast tissues typically grown on a female body. Yeah. And I say typically because I want to leave margin in there for anybody else who wants to feel included. But the idea that this symbol of femininity can actually host something that could kill someone, I think it's just it's a more scary thought.
Yeah,
but it's still the same amount of death, So like, but I mean, these were also
probably
challenges.
with a very similar market. I'm assuming, if you want to call it a market, I'm just saying like women who are aging, maybe who didn't do a lot of athletic things, typically probably have not as good bone density. Is my point. Is like that same segment of the population is going to struggle with that.
Yeah.
Like they're similar.
Yeah. Similar groups of people. Also, anyone who's had chemo or radiation destroys your bone. Even quicker than veganism does, which is shocking. Cause it's really bad with veganism. So 20 out of 20 studies have demonstrated that vegetarianism and veganism will cause you to have much more damaged bone density and ultimately shorter mortality. You'll die younger by being a vegan because your bones are just so frail. Also they get osteonecrosis problems. You ever see a vegan bite into like a carrot and their teeth come out?
No.
This happens. That's like 7 years after being vegan. Yeah, your skull loses attachment to its teeth.
So wild.
Yeah, and people are like, American Medical Association is telling you this is the healthiest thing you can do.
Right.
And they know better. They know that's not true. But it works out for world governments who like pushing cheap food.
Sure. What do you get a bunch of people coming to you from that lifestyle at all, or are they just so repelled by everything else that you say that they're not willing to listen to you on this other topic?
No. So, I mean, I don't like the idea of veganism. It is malnutrition, but I'm not mean to vegans. Like I always attack the idea, not the person.
Okay.
Because the person's maybe just misinformed.
Sure.
Like that's not their fault. And also like I'm a gentleman. Like I learned that in my fraternity. You never say anything nasty about a person. You might say what they're trafficking in is
well,
bad.
if you can't disseminate ideas, how do we know if they're correct or incorrect?
Well, also ad hominem, like you don't want to look at, like I noticed that when people what I'm most known for is not the bone density thing. It's X3. It's the muscle technology. So I can force a muscle to grow way faster than anybody who's lifting weights. And that's why my second book is called Weightlifting is a Waste of Time. And I demonstrate that in the book, but people, they get so upset and then they look at my scientific arguments. Well, the scientific argument's bulletproof, like variable resistance. So like when I do a chest press, I hold 130 pounds here at the bottom, in the middle, maybe 300 pounds, and then 550 at the top. And I can exhaust the musculature to a far greater degree and trigger much more growth by doing that. And all of the studies on the subject say exactly the same thing. Like this will make you grow muscle much faster. So what happens is people want to attack me. They can't attack the scientific argument, so they attack me personally instead. Yeah. So they make fun of my university and say it's not accredited, which is a lie. It is. Or they'll say, well, he takes steroids, which I don't. Which is really easy to figure out because it's sort of like, have you ever seen a steroid user? Like they're very different.
Yeah.
And all other little things. So they attack me personally.
Yeah. Because they don't like your ideas.
Right. Because they're upset by the idea, but they know the way I've presented it is infallible.
Yeah. You're not just like a meathead that worked out once.
Right. And I'm not just a guy with an opinion. Yeah. Like, in fact, all of the claims I've ever made, I have multiple research references backing them up. So it's like, if you don't like the idea, well, that's your emotions. Like science isn't for you to like or dislike. It just is.
Yeah.
So like ultimately, somebody says something else is, the most effective, whatever. It's like, it is not your place to get upset about it. You just accept it for what it is and say, well, I'm not going to do it that way. Oh, okay. Well, great. Nobody was going to force you to.
Sure.
But don't kick and scream about a scientific finding. Right. Like that's the behavior of a 2-year-old.
But this documentary that I watched.
Right. Yeah. No, I get a lot of people, well, not so much anymore, but people used to ask me about game changers all the time.
Yeah.
Every single fact in there's a lie. Yeah. Everything. There are many websites
documentaries
that go
are hard,
through
man.
the list.
I like documentaries, but then like you said, like they're not, most of the time they're not just educational, like unbiased educational pieces. Somebody's got a story, somebody's got something they want to prove. They start with the premise,
of course,
and then they go search for all the evidence to support the premise, and they put it into a film.
Which is exactly
they know what music they're selecting. They know what scenes, what stories they're telling.
Any scientific process,
of course, yeah,
right. Start with
the
what
conclusion,
you want to present. Start
and
with
then
the
find evidence, to back up what you already have concluded.
But ultimately, making a documentary is not free.
Right.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to pay for it. And if they're going to pay for it,
they got to profit from it.
Yeah. Right. Same with writing a book. I get criticized for talking about the products I developed in my book. And it's just like, why do you think I wrote a book?
Yeah.
Nobody makes money off of writing books anymore.
Right.
Like literally nobody. Right. I mean,
except
maybe
for John Grisham.
Yeah. I was going to say fiction. You can make a lot of money writing fiction. But if you're writing a scientific text, you're probably going to have baked into that text some ideas that have something to do with your business. And I don't see anything wrong with that.
No.
I'm being 100% truthful in all the information I'm presenting, but I also have a patented product that goes along with all this information.
Yeah, exactly. Well, listen, man, this has been a lot of fun. I'm sure we'll get some amazing controversial clips out of this for you.
Cool.
But appreciate you coming on. Before we take off here, where should people go find out a little bit more about what you got going on?
Well, because my last name is so hard to spell, It's drj.com.
drj.com.
DOCTOR, the letter J.com. Then there's links to all my social. If you're going to follow me on one thing, follow me on Instagram. I just like the platform better.
Great.
And whenever I do something on YouTube, I always promote it.
And that's your full name, right? On Instagram?
It's Dr. Jaquish, DRJAQUISH.
Dr. Jaquish on Instagram.
Right. But you can find that through drj.com if you go to Dr. J.
Doctor spelled out DOCTORJ.com. Go check out some of the stuff that John has out there. If they're, go to Google Maps, search for an OsteoStrong in your local area, try to find find one of those spots, go in, see if there's any issues that maybe you could
mostly it's probably for your listeners, it's probably your mother's.
Okay.
It's probably
perfect.
Yeah, because
good to know.
Osteoporosis typically affecting 60 and over. Though it can affect younger people. It can affect people in their 20s if they're super inactive.
Yeah,
and if they eat like basically the standard American diet.
Yeah.
No, I mean I actually had a meeting at West Point not that long ago talking about how the best of the best coming into West Point are having osteoporosis. Think about that. Yeah, teenagers, 18 years old, they have osteoporosis. So like it's becoming a much younger challenge, but yeah, for the most part, it's going to be postmenopausal population. So, ask your mother if she has low bone density and then try and find an OsteoStrong
location
for her.
Thanks so much for coming on. That was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thanks, Travis.
Cool. Yes, sir.
All right.